Next up, I would just like to introduce Serene, who is working closely with First Nation communities in Ontario to better understand neonatal abstinence syndrome and prenatal opioid exposure, so that future community and culturally appropriate interventions can be developed and used by not only by families, by schools, but also by community services to support children who have been exposed to prenatal opioids. All right, Serene. So I'm going to hand over the podium to you.
Great.
Finding my list. There we go. All right. So you should see the prompt, and it should work.
Here we go.
Fantastic.
All right. You can start.
Feel free, yes. Thank you.
Are we good?
Yeah, no, you're coming through great.
Awesome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today and joining the session. I'm speaking to you from Oshawa, Ontario, and I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Squamish Island First Nation. And knowing that we are tight for time and we only have 10 minutes, I am going to jump right in. Opioid exposure have been on the rise for the last 15-20 years in Ontario, across Canada, and globally. And with prenatal opioid exposure, NAS may be present or it may not. So when I say NAS, it's Neonatal Abstinence syndrome, and it is a group of conditions caused when a baby withdraws. And either of those scenarios may lead to long-term developmental impacts, whether they're motor, cognitive, social. But I think it's crucial not to underestimate the socio-environmental influence, and it's quite challenging to tease that out from the direct opioid effect. And findings aren't homogeneous, even within each of these sort of developmental markers. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about some of the strategies and processes that we feel have helped our project be successful so far. So this project really was born from 4 community members, First community members, approaching one of our team members at a conference and saying that they're interested in research on prenatal opioid exposure and perhaps engaging in research themselves. So that person was Jennifer Walker, and she's a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Health at Laurentian, and she's also our Indigenous lead at ICES. So she connected with Astrid and I, my other co-PI, regarding this sort of emerging project, and we were both very excited about it. And then we all came together, the original community members who had reached out to Jen, and we came together as a team. And one of the first things that we did was we came together, and I remember it was down on Six Nations a few years ago for 2 days. And we talked about not so much the details of the project, because knowing that this was going to be an emergent design, we had some broad ideas around what we wanted to do, but it was really going to be in the community's hands. We talked about how we wanted to work together as a team, and we actually developed a core team research agreement. So a research agreement among the 8 of us, and it centered on First Nation principles and ethics. So, for example, OCAP. And I'm going to go over these briefly. If anybody wants to connect with me after to get some literature or some more information. But we wanted to ensure that the data itself, whatever data was developed, was going to be owned and controlled and possessed, and if not possessed, at least have access from First Nations communities. So it's First Nation communities owning their own data essentially and having control over it. We also really wanted to ensure that our project was founded on collective decision making, and that the community was the center of all our decisions that we made in their best interest. And then the R's that we talk about a lot in Indigenous health research: rights, responsibility, reciprocity, and relationships. And I think that those R's are applicable to most of our work with communities. And that relationships, it's the foundation of our work. If we didn't have good relationships amongst our team and amongst our communities, this research would not exist. And then obviously making sure that we are by the TR or the TCPS 2 on the guidelines for research with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in Canada. So we wrote out an agreement that embedded all of these sort of ethical principles, and it guides us. And if we ever get off track, we can look at it and say, okay, this is what we promised to one another. So we decided to put together some project goals, but they were loose, if I may so. But we knew that one of the first things we had to do was build strong relationships with First Nation communities. So we actually wrote that into our project goals. And then gather and share community and culturally specific information around prenatal opioid exposure and NAS. We weren't sure what that was going to be. We were going to have communities determine that, but based on our work with those original First Nation communities, we suspected that was going to be something that would be of value and meaningful to the First Nation communities. So then we decided that we were going to pitch this idea to First Nation communities in Southern Ontario. So to do this, we ran 2 community-based facilitated information and planning sessions. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we held 2 events. They were 2 days each, and we had them in 2 strategically placed geographical locations, one at Rama First Nation, one down in London, to have a gathering location that was fairly easy to access for most First Nations in Southern Ontario. And we brought in 56 delegates from 23 First Nations, and we did an overview of available literature on prenatal opioid exposure and NAS. We talked about who we were as individuals, as a team, what we would like to do and why, potential benefits from this research. And then we did a lot of breakout sessions, and we got a lot of feedback on the project. And at this point, we knew how sensitive this topic was going in, but I think it became very apparent and very palpable after we received the feedback. A lot of it was great, but some of it was tough, and we were very much reminded of the historical injustices of research in Indigenous communities. And we also became very attuned to our language at that point and started to, be careful about our words. And not to say that we weren't before. I think most on our team are very aware of language, but even certain things like recruitment, we now choose to use the word opt-in, and where possible, we use the word information and not research, as we're building relationships, because research is it's a pretty loaded word. So we got a lot of feedback, and we designed our project. And what we did was we decided that we were going to do a mixed methods emergent design with 2 separate arms: a quantitative, where we were going to acquire the rates of NAS and prenatal opioid exposure for communities that opted in, and then the qualitative research. If anybody wants to, after the presentation, look at what data sources we have for the quantitative research, and this is all through ICES, but things like OHIP, the Indian registry, so bringing together data that helps us identify First Nations community members, and then also multiple different data sets that are helping us really narrow in on NAS and prenatal opioid exposure in those communities. And the qualitative work, not just focusing on the impact and the negative, but the strengths and the resiliency in the community, and moving forward, how we might be able to utilize those strengths to support mothers and particularly long-term the children with neurodevelopmental impairments. So we designed the study, and then we took it on the road. We called up and we drove to all the communities, whether it be, if they're really far away. Sometimes we would just do phone presentations very similar to this. We would explain, how we took the feedback from those sessions and we developed the study. And a lot of times we had to go to communities multiple times because you'd present to the health committee and then they'd say, this is great, but you need to present to this committee. So we present to that committee and then they'd say, you know what, we're in as well, love it. You need to get chief and council. They're going to be signing off. So then we present to chief and council, and we have a wonderful project manager. This project has a long time ago. And so we share a lot in presenting most of our team, but Aggie was the one coordinating. We all we all the that the principles, the details on sovereignty, our ethics, all the important things. But we had to strike a balance too. And I think I talk about it on my next slide here. I do. So after we had the research agreements signed from our First Nation communities, we went to obtain ethics. And it was really important to strike a balance with our university legal counsel because they see a research agreement as a legal agreement, whereas we and our community see it as an individual commitment by me, Serene, as a person who also is a researcher, to work with a community. So there was a lot of back and forth, and everything worked out, and we didn't have to, have the lawyers involved, which our community members did not want whatsoever. But with legal or with ethics, it was a pretty complex process. We were acquiring it from multiple institutions. Some First Nation communities also have their own ethics boards that you have to acquire ethics through. We had to really address duty to report for child abuse or negligence because there was a higher chance of that coming out in this data. We had to weigh the benefits versus the potential harm with focus groups, particularly in a small community when there may be issues with confidentiality and substance use. And ensure that we had, if there was going to be any emotional challenges that arose, having support for our participants. So really showing that we had the right people in place to provide care if necessary. And I think what worked for us is we had clear evidence of a relationship. We had it was very well documented. It went back months, actually almost a year. We had a core team which included people with a variety of experience and expertise. And we let REB know about the forthcoming submission a couple months in advance, and give them a heads up. It might not be the fastest approval that they've ever done, and they may want to set aside some time, and they were really grateful for that. So I know I've connected with some people from the child right community on these types of challenging ethical applications, and if anybody is thinking about navigating this sort of work, I encourage you to connect with myself or somebody from the team, and we'd be happy to help you as members of this community. Then we collected we conducted our research and collected the data. So we did 19 focus groups, 31 individual interviews, prevalence data for the 13 communities, and then we're also putting together aggregate data sets for the qualitative and quantitative. So this is a lot more research than we had anticipated. We thought that we might be lucky to get 4 communities on board given the sensitivity of the project, but we had 13 come on board. Child Right's been wonderful and flexible with us during this journey, and in any way that they can, knowing how important this work is. And people have participated, so we have mothers, people with lived experience, healthcare providers, teachers, early year educators. It's a really rich data set. We're now in the process of analysis. We have about 3 communities. We're working through the quantitative data at ICES. That's a little bit on the back burner right now with COVID-19, and I have to catch up with the qualitative right now anyways. It's a complex analysis process in qualitative research with Indigenous communities. There's a very strong and stringent audit trail. We have peer scrutiny from Indigenous colleagues. We have member checking with actual participants in the community. So it's not we're just doing interviews and then pulling together the quotes that we'd like. It's there's multiple steps in that process. So we're working through that right now. And then we're going to be sharing findings. Hopefully this fall we will start doing this. Our first duty is to report and share findings with the community, and that's why I'm not sharing any findings with you all today, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, actually, I think it's a really good thing. This is their data, and they deserve to hear it first. And helping First Nation communities tell their stories through this data, and also, when we do share it more widely and we navigate that process with our communities on how we want to publish this, their hope and our hope is that it can, perhaps inspire seeds or needs for questions for other communities or other groups, globally, knowing that our communities are very aware that, this data is so important to them, but it's also really, we might be sort of forging the way in this area of research, and they want to make sure that a Maori community in New Zealand can have access to it, and one of the best ways to do that arguably maybe through certain types of peer-reviewed publications. So I'll end it there, and thank you very much for listening, and open it up for questions.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that really important work that you are doing with those communities, Serene. I'm just a bit cognizant of the time. I realize we've had so much great content. I was not keeping track really well today. So perhaps we might have to skip questions for now, but if it's okay with you, I'll just encourage the audience to connect with me. And if you have any questions that are particular to Serene's presentation, feel free to relay those to me, and we will get back to you with the response in the next week or so.
Sounds great, Priya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Serene.